2024-470, discussion regarding new ferry and terminal modernization funding.
Hello, Council. Can you hear me? Yes. Elizabeth Cosa, Public Works. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay. I want to make sure that I have two consultants on, Kelly and Carla. I'll introduce them real quick. So Kelly Leasing is the project manager for this project with our consultant KPFF. She consultant engineers Marine Transit Group, and Carla Sawyer is the financial specialist on the project. She's got extensive experience working with transit and ferry systems. Previously, she was the director of finance and administration for Washington State Ferries, and her and I missed each other by, I think, a year when I was working there. So lucky to have Carl on the team. All right. So real quick over the agenda. So we're going to do a little bit of a project overview of the general ferry project replacement and terminal and the current funding needs. We're going to be asking council for concurrence decision. Should we proceed with the current project as the level of service outlines? We also want to hear from what other information council would need in order to make a decision regarding the funding. And then at the end of this, we'll have about 20 minutes to discuss. I ask you to hold your questions, but if you have a question you need to have pertaining to the slide or you want us to clarify, feel free to speak up. Let's go a little bit over the project history. So we had, back in 2007, the county did bring forth a 35 car new ferry project. There wasn't any public process with that. The project was estimated to be around 16 million. The County Road and Administration Board did award us with $8 million. However, because of the lack of level of service and the lack of community involvement, the council ultimately ended up putting the whole project on hold, and we gave back the $8 million from CRAB. In 2017, however, we did start the level of service study, which included extensive public engagement, resulted in the adoption recommendation of a 34-car hybrid electric vessel, and that was completed in 2018. Thereafter, Public Works started trying to get some money. So we started with Build First in 2020, unsuccessful with that. Moved on in 2021 with the RAISE grant. We were unsuccessful with that. That was also, both of those were with just a diesel ferry itself. We were told by RAISE after review that if you look into greenhouse gases and emissions and making the vessel more environmentally friendly, that would be more competitive. So we changed it to a electric battery hybrid in line with our resolution. And in 2022, we were awarded $25 million. In that time period, also, we were able to procure from CRAB another $10 million. And that was for more debt financing. That's $500,000 a year over a 20-year period. And with that, I'm going to move on to Kelly. And Kelly and Carla, let me know when you want me to move slides.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. As Liz mentioned, we had an approved financial plan. We worked with the council in 2021. At that time, the estimated project costs were $41 million. And then in the 2022 RAISE grant, those costs were updated to $50 million to reflect use of a hybrid electric vessel with shoreside charging rather than the diesel ferry. And since that point, estimated costs have increased due to both cost escalation and new project elements. So as you can see in the table at the bottom of the slide, costs, especially in the shipbuilding industry, have really increased at a significant rate. You can see a 20% escalation in 2022 alone. on top of general escalation, which we all know was high. In addition, as we have refined project design to progressed it to a more advanced level, we have a better understanding of additional cost elements. We added vessel electrification as well as construction of new passenger-only ferry floats at both terminals to provide access to the island during construction as well as future vessel outages. And we also have additional project costs, including environmental mitigation and TARO, as well as project management and technical support over the term of the project, along with one-time operating costs and revenue impact during terminal and vessel construction. Go ahead, Liz.
This is Carla. I'm going to speak to the financial plan development. We, and you can read it here, so I'll just go very quickly over how we went about developing financial plans. We looked at the project scenarios, how this might come together, and what the schedules might be. We estimated expenditures for each of the possible scenarios and timelines. We then took a look at all the known revenue sources. Then we looked at any potential additional revenue sources, and finally built cash flow statements for each scenario using some form of debt financing to cover any funding gaps that were discovered. So you can move to the next slide, Liz. I mentioned that we developed scenarios, and we did. We developed 2 primary scenarios and an in-kind replacement. So the first scenario most closely matches the scenario that was actually proposed in the RAISE grant, the winning RAISE grant. And so it has a single project phase. You do everything in one phase. That's electrification of the ferry and all of the additional things that need to be done, like the shoreside charging, the improvements to the marine structures so that the boat will fit, everything that needs to be done in one phase. Based on some feedback from the PSE, Puget Sound Energy, we realized that we probably should look at a potential deferred phased project op scenario. It's possible that that PSE may not have the capacity, the shoreside capacity, to do the full charging in the very first phase. So in this one, you would have the 34-car vessel would be built. It would be built with hybrid diesel propulsion rather than the full electric. All the other items, the shore structures would be done and the uplands improvements would be done. The only thing that wouldn't be done on the shore side would be the shoreside structure, charging structures. Those would be deferred. Then to give you an example of for financing, to just evaluate the financing options, we looked at in-kind replacement. Now, in-kind replacement has some downsides, as you can see there. You'd have to default on the RAISE grant because you would be using a diesel vessel. You would also be rejecting the level of service resolution that was passed a few years ago, establishing the 34-car, because you would be building a 15-car diesel vessel. The advantages here are you would only make minimal shoreside improvements. Well, I shouldn't say minimal. You would not have to improve the shoreside for a larger vessel. You would have to perform the deferred terminal maintenance. And then you wouldn't do any other uplands improvements. And obviously you wouldn't install the charging equipment. So those are the 3 scenarios that we developed financial plans for. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so the first step, and what I'll walk you through this slide here, is looking at what the cash flow is based on what we know right now, merely current funding. So if you look at the first 2 lines, the total capital investment, those for single phase, it's the $82,600,000. That's how much it would cost to buy all the investment you need for the single phase. If you do it in 2 phases, it costs a little more. You spend a little less in the first phase than you would if you did a single phase, but you're going to incur some additional sort of lack of efficiency, loss of efficiency, and some cost escalation by deferring it. So that's how you get to the 87. If you do a simple in-kind replacement, you're looking at just under $40 million to do it. The other thing that we looked at for expenditures is operating program impacts. If you do it in one phase, your program impacts are about 3.2 million. And those are things like the charter, the cost of the charter for the time that the terminals are out of service during when the in-water work is being done. There's some loss of revenue. There's some break-in training costs. In the deferred option, those go up because you have 2 out of service periods because the vessel is out being retrofitted for full-on electric. So you'd have charter costs again, and you have some loss of revenue again. So then the next block that you see on the chart there, this is the funding, known funding for each of the options. The first 2 are the same. You have the $25 million grant from RAISE. You have the 10 million from CRAB. You have 5.3 million that the county already received from the Move Ahead funding package. And then you have what we estimate the user fees would be over the project period on the $1 capital surcharge. And those are 3.6 in all cases. Then you can see on the in-kind, of course, you still have the CRAB, you still have the appropriation, you still have the user fees, you just lost so not surprisingly, because of the much lower cost, the smallest current funding gap is with the in-kind, and you can see the range there. Okay, so does everyone have a chance to take a look at that? Because we can go to the next slide. So to develop financial plans, I just want to cover just a couple of the assumptions. There'd be a more detailed list of assumptions that we would prepare with any written report on a plan. But we assumed a 4.5% bond rate. That's based on some current feedback about what what counties are paying for bonding. We assumed a 20-year term. We did not identify a specific local tax revenue source, but just to give us a sense of what we could be working with, we used the equivalent of 5 cents countywide real property tax. These plans are preliminary, as you see there, and there's a number of things that would probably need to be adjusted if you really picked one and wanted to refine it. In all cases, we made an attempt to maintain a positive fund balance, and we tried to also get as close to 0 at the end of the 20-year cycle as we could. Okay, so results. You're going to see the 3 phases, the 2 options and the in-kind are across the top. Under the 2 electrification options, we ran scenarios for both a higher level of additional state funding and a lower level. And I'll walk through the table about that. But the reason we did that is we know that your county has received less state support for the new replacement ferry than the nearby county, just south of you all. So we believe you have a strong chance for getting additional state funding to help with your vessel. We picked 2 levels. The 18.7 million would get you to a funding level equivalent to what Skagit County received for Guaymas. The only caveat there is 10 million of that 18.7 is from the Cap and Serve program fund from the Climate Act. And there is a ballot measure, you probably all are aware of that could jeopardize the availability of that funding. So with knowing that, we then looked at a lower funding level, which is the 8.7. So that would be if the Cap and Serve initiative succeeded and that money wasn't available. So the total project expenditures are the same as you saw on the previous slides 2 back. What's new on this slide is financing costs, because on the first slide, you saw no financing costs, just the hard costs associated with construction. Now we've added financing costs, so we know the total cost that we believe each of these options would be. And so you can see those across the bottom line there. The lowest one is still, of course, the in-kind, even though there's a fair chunk of financing costs required there because you have less outside funding source. It's still the lowest option. Then the next, less known funding line there shows you the lines that you saw before on the previous slide. So here's the additional funding that's required. No matter what option you look at, there's going to be additional local funding required to both cover some of the project costs and also to service the debt to cover the front end financing needs. So then to give you an idea of how it might get better is here's the Lex potential additional state is identified for those two options. And under that scenario, you can see it changes some in that a single phase with higher state funding now requires a couple $1 million less in local funds than the in-kind replacement. So things to think about with the in-kind replacement too is you probably, there's some jeopardy when you decide to go with a less green approach for any future grant funding you might want to receive that has environmental benefits associated with award. Also, of course, we mentioned the fact that you've lost your level of service gains are lost. You're back to a vessel that's approximately the same number of cars as you're carrying today. So that, I guess, and just to recap quickly, if you get no additional funds, clearly your in-kind replacement is the least costly from a local funding point of view, 39.7 versus 56.4. However, if you are successful in getting the higher level of state funding, suddenly you can do the single phase fully electric vessel for 37.7.
Thank you, Carla and Kelly. All right, so let's talk about available options for revenue. So Carla talked about the additional state appropriation as modeled in those scenarios. And that's based on Skagit County, what they received. What that would require is we're going to have to actually engage with the state to get more funding. Regardless of what we do, whether we stay with the level of service or we don't, I think we need to be doing this anyway. So engagement with the state. The second is a countywide real property taxing district, otherwise known as the countywide ferry district. The 2018 level of service actually called this out as something to pursue. It actually said 75 cents. The RCW allows 75 cents per 1,000. We know that is not anywhere obtainable, but we did look at that scenario in 2020 at 4 cents. And then for this presentation, you saw we did 5 cents for the scenarios. Other items would possibly be more state or federal grant that might be out there, competitive grants. There's issues with grants, especially on the federal side. We already had the ferry boat program funds, which were actually, we found out, conflict with the RAISE grant. The RAISE grant is very restrictive. And so we had to use those program funds for other means. And basically, in fact, you guys saw that through council, I believe through the budget last council, where we weren't able to use those ferry program funds because of that. And then we also have a looming deadline. So, and we're going to go through the timeline in a second, but we have less than a year to apply and get a federal grant and actually receive it. So I don't really think with the RAISE grant and our current level of service that trying to find another grant that's compatible with our very restrictive grant is really all that feasible, but we can still try. And then, of course, we have the increased fare surcharge, which we already have. This is such a low yield, it's not even to come close in the period of time that we would need in order to construct this, but it is another option as well. So key project decision points. So the items in green are the key schedule drivers for Public Works. So you're going to see there, we need to complete that NEPA before we can even draft the MARAD agreement. We need to advance the terminal design to 60% for permitting in order to get that construction in time for that window, that 2027 water work window. We have very little wiggle room with the schedule with MARAD at this point, and we can't really delay the project for long drawn out funding discussions. In fact, this time next year, we need to have that financial plan that demonstrates the ability to fully fund the project. I should note here that an indecision with funding by this time next year will automatically default in a loss of the RAISE grant. So we have to make a decision, and punting it is a decision in itself. The items blue are the decisions that we need from the council in order to move forward. So with that, again, decision on whether to proceed with the current project that meets the adopted level of service goals, and a decision how to fund that project, and a commitment to establishing a ferry district potentially, and approval to start the bonding process. I'm not expecting, we are not expecting for you to make a decision today. This is a discussion only. When I met with you a couple months ago and we talked about what it looked like for the cost, this is that presentation. What I would suggest is if the council is amenable to put together some work sessions, and maybe that is a work group, or maybe that is with Public Works session, to be actually kind of like flesh through this stuff in a timely manner. I would also like to provide you with a memo of those timelines so we can actually schedule to that, if that's something that the council would be interested in doing as well. So those are kind of the key next steps and our suggestions on how to move forward. So you're open for questions now.
All right, thank you all. Everybody's up here going.
I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
So, Elizabeth, I first, I think when I emailed you this morning, I said, yikes, but this is more, I'm skeptical about the options that you're giving us, in part because it maybe is skewing, it makes the financing of a 15 vote option look way equal to some of these other options. It doesn't have any scenarios where there would be an electric smaller boat that doesn't meet the level of service that would really lower the terminal costs that are involved with this. I mean, I'm just still, I haven't even recovered from the first time you told us that we'd be looking at these kind of numbers. This is going to take a lot to kind of get to a decision on this, but there just seems like going back to the drawing board, other options rather than getting into the $100 million range, which is what we're looking at here. So is that something that we could be hearing about, a 15-foot electric boat, or that would qualify for grants, or some smaller boat, different level of service that would also be eligible potentially for some grants?
Councilmember Scanlon.
Was there a question there?
Did you want me to?
Yeah, I think there might have been a question there. I'd be interested.
Yeah,
in
it was
that.
a question. It was like, are there other
I was thinking
scenarios?
about a 15-foot ferry.
To
15.
answer your question, we can
Hard.
look into all sorts of different scenarios. So no, the council is not limited to sticking with the resolution that was done when the environment was, when the boat total cost, I think it was going to be 50 million in the time of build. I think that was the last real big update that council received. That all being said, we have deferred maintenance on terminal structures that are upwards of, it's in the next few years, we're looking at 20 years of deferred maintenance on terminal structures, of which now it looks like we have a history of emergency outages, which is a massive disruption to that community and to Public Works as well. I should say probably everyone. It's a large disruption. And there is that the cost. I mean, I gave you some other slides too. I'm going to move through some of them, but here's kind of a breakdown of the current project. So you asked about shoreside electrification. So we're at upwards of 8 million for that. And this is what I'll supply this in the memo that I give you later after this meeting. But just to give you a general aspect of, could you look at other scenarios? Sure. The level of service discussion with the public process took almost about 2 years. I don't think we have 2 years. We're looking at a deferred maintenance on the vessel and deferred maintenance on terminal structures that have put us into some outages. So hopefully that answers some of your question.
Yeah, when the public process has already cost us a lot of money. We could have built a boat for $16 million back in 2007. But no, I wasn't asking about the electrification. I was just like, are there scenarios when we do these work sessions where there would be a smaller boat that would qualify for grants? Because you don't have the financing scenarios don't have a smaller boat qualifying for any grants. Would that be an electric boat? That's just for future discussion. That's something I'd be interested in, whether it's electric or not.
Sure, we could absolutely look into other grant opportunities for a smaller electrified vessel.
Looks like Carla wanted to weigh in on that, maybe.
I think I'm just backing up what Liz said, you'd have to start the grant process over. You'd return the 25 million because it was premised on the larger vessel. So, but you could start again with a smaller vessel. And if it's electrified, you probably could compete reasonably well nationally for it. But you'd have to start over.
Councilmember Scanlon.
Thank you for the update on this. And I'm just wondering with the projections regarding the various levels of state funding, when would we need that by? I'm just thinking about legislative sessions. Next year's the long session. We'd probably want to push for this then. Probably want to start those discussions now. I recognize some of our legislators are probably out knocking on doors right now.
Right.
Maybe after the primary, we can have those conversations. But I'm just curious, what's your sense of timing on that? When would we need that by in order to make some of these decisions?
I believe we would need that at least by this time next year. We would need to, because that's when our funding plan goes to raise for approval so that we can enter a grant agreement. And they're not going to enter a grant agreement with us unless we have our funding secured.
Okay. Because the thing to me that I look at is just that local funding gap. Although it would take a lot to get there, but I mean, there is this potential route that could get us to the lowest gap, which is if we get that 18 million like they did in Skagit. So I think that could be potentially part of our work sessions, and I'd be happy to start talking with legislators about that. And I forget, do we have our new lobbyist on board yet?
Not quite yet. We hope to sign a contract in September.
Great. And maybe they can help with that if we're going to go that route.
Councilmember Galloway.
Yeah, just to tail on, I was working in the legislature when the Skagit was requesting their Guimas Island. I think Caleb might have even been working for Skagit when they did. They hired a single lobbyist just for their Guimas Island ferry. That was in addition to their contract they had with their kind of overall lobbyist firm. And it took them 3 or 4 legislative sessions to secure. So I think it sounds great. Like, let's march up to our 42nd LD and ask them for $50 million. But I mean, that could take years. And so I just want us to be like, I don't mean to like be a, negative person on this one. I just want us to be a little bit humbled on like the lift that would take. But I think we should start the conversation. I think if we haven't already, I think we should be talking to Congressman Larson if we haven't already, seeing what our options are. But I am interested in this ferry district, that is called ferry district idea. Maybe Liz, would you be willing to help me understand a little bit more on, would this affect everyone in the county or just unincorporated county or just Lummi Island? And depending upon, the 4 to 5 cents you projected all the way up to what's statutorily allowed, like what would that revenue generation look like in the whatever time period we would need to raise the funds?
Sure. I'll talk briefly about it, and then I'll probably ask Randy to come up. He knows a little bit more about it, and possibly Carla to speak up, because I know that she's worked with Kitsap County that ended up doing a countywide ferry district. So we would be asking for countywide, meaning all citizens, all 250,000-ish that are in here in Whatcom County. For this, doing a district only, like let's say it's just Lummi Island, you might as well just raise the fares. It's the same. It's the same impact, and it's really not going to get us to where we need to be. The countywide ferry district really is where we could see the most amount of revenue and have the best benefit toward and potentially having the lowest cost per person than just doing unincorporated. So it's more of sharing the wealth, essentially. You want to add anything? Carla, you want to add a little bit more about countywide districts?
Yes, I guess I can say a little about your own. When we looked at the countywide, and this is just rough numbers using your 2024 assessments, a countywide gave us 9 million. A Lummi Island only gave us less than 100,000 a year, and a county road district gave us 4.2. So we just looked at that to kind of put some parameters around how big a ferry district would have to be to generate enough revenue to fund the project.
Councilmember Scanlon.
Yeah, I think it's interesting it's worth looking at that, the ferry district idea. And my understanding, this could be a councilmanic option. I think the other thing to consider about that is that if we had such a district, then we wouldn't have to pull from the road fund, right?
For the capital piece, and potentially how you would want to word that countywide ferry district. You could have it go beyond, you could have it in perpetuity. You could decide not to have an end date after it's paid back, but continue it on. And then it could alleviate the road fund for operational costs.
There's potentially a scenario here where the road fund's in better shape.
Correct.
And we might be able to provide more services to folks in unincorporated areas that would like to have better roads. But there's some potential benefits here, and there are trade-offs too, but I think it's worth considering.
I could note if the decision was to fully bond, that causes all sorts of problems for both the road fund and the county in general. It affects our ability to bond some of these other community priorities like the jail and the Northwest Annex. Also, someone has to pay that bond down every year. You don't just get the money and then that's it. That would be either a general fund, which is pretty much off limits, or the road funds. And essentially that could be up to $2 to $3 million a year in addition to the regular operational costs just to pay a bond down. And what that means in layman's terms, that's a major construction project every year we would not do.
Councilmember Donovan?
Yeah, thanks. The bonding stuff, that's one of my questions. And we look through some scenarios going forward is how would that, if that's part of the mixed local funding, how would that affect other projects we're doing? But the other local funding sources, like we got a timeline that we have to be working with. How do we figure out, how many years would it take us to get that state funding potentially? And if we put a ferry district on the ballot, how long would it take us to get that going? Would it pass the first time? If it doesn't pass the first time, there's those massive uncertainties when we're looking at these funding scenarios about what potential local funding would be, that I'm really going to need some more clarity to be able to process these options and the additional options.
I would say, Councilmember Donovan, with regard to if you're going to go for a county-wide vote rather than a councilmatic vote, I'm trying to recall how many times Kitsap had to do it, but I believe they had to do it 3 times over 3 separate ballot measures in order for the Kitsap County to pass.
I'm being realistic.
Right.
That it would be put on the ballot.
Other comments, questions?
One last thing.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
The Ferry Advisory Committee meets tomorrow night. I see several members here, the chair and other members. I'm going to do my best to be there in person. If not, I'll be there remotely. But I'll be interested to hear from you all to see what your take is 24 hours from now. I know it's not a lot of time to consider, but I am interested in, partnering with the advisory committee to get their take, get some recommendations from them on this, because I think, the community's voice here on what's the best way forward can help guide us in many ways in this.
So with regard to the work sessions, is that something the council would be willing to partake in with us? And then in what form would you like that? Would you like a special team because we're a committee of the whole that we would have group off the side, or would you want it during a public work session?
That's too many questions. We'll never be able to answer that.
Yes.
Yes, I'm indifferent.
Councilmember Galloway.
I mean, what would this look like kind of concurrent with a water work session as an example? Does that give you enough in sequence, or would you need them more regularly? I'm just thinking we already have those times blocked off. I mean, I know it's water, it's kind of a stretch, but it's still your team and
It's on the water.
it's on the
It's on the
water.
water. I think to start with, that's a great plan. We can start with that, and we can decide if we need to kind of ramp up based off of the timeline and the deadlines for kind of the raise grant timeline. I think that's a good start. We could start with that. And then really, if the council is looking for, and I heard Councilmember Donovan talk about a few things, bonding, he wants some information on bonding, a potential other grant availability, or I think, what was the third one you said as far as putting stuff?
Grant grant funding for a smaller boat, getting rid of
Yeah,
that
for
level of
smaller boat.
service.
So we could start there.
Okay, sounds like we have a plan of sort
Sounds great. Sounds great.
for Galloway.
Well, I don't want to I want to open a can of worms. Has there been any consideration of alternative infrastructure? Like a, mm-hmm. Mhm. Or is that, we want to talk about that later?
Well, I'll be honest that we're looking at all scenarios. So we did a very high level concept on what a bridge could look like. Obviously, tons of information to move forward with anything different. But yeah, just looking at every avenue, what options are out there. There has been a very high level look at what maybe we could build and what that would take.
I'm guessing that's in the magnitude of like double this, or do we have any idea?
Very, very high level, and don't ever hold me to this, 250 million. There are mega grant options out there, whether or not we're competitive for it. There's also BIA, partnership with Lummi Nation, if that's something they would be interested in. There's those options. So nothing's off the table, I guess, with numbers that are this big.
Okay, we'll look forward to that first work session.
Thanks. On that note.
All right, thanks. All right, now we're going to move to items for committee discussion and recommendation to council. First item is AB 2024